Hello everyone. In last video I taught you about the anatomy of the heart, right? I told you about the conducting system of heart. Now before watching this video, I sincerely request you that if you have not watched those previous videos of anatomy and the conducting system of heart, please bachche go back and first watch those videos. First remember the names of the various parts of heart, various valves of heart, various veins and arteries which are coming in and out of the heart, and the various steps of the conducting system of heart. Otherwise you will not get to understand about this video. So now this video which we are going to discuss is about the cardiac cycle and how the heart takes in all the blood and pushes it, makes it reach to the lungs and circulates it throughout whole of your body. So this video is about the cardiac cycle. Now let us start with the cardiac cycle. We will start with the basic knowledge which we gained in our previous videos, and let us look into this. So first I will introduce you to two terms. Those are systole and diastole. Systole and diastole. Now you must have measured or listened about blood pressure in your life at least once, and everybody nowadays know what blood pressure is, and you definitely must tell your doctor or anyone you are measuring the blood pressure that it is like 120/80, right? You always say this by this, there is some value divided by some value. So what is that actually? That is not division like maths. That is the above value which you are saying, that is your systolic blood pressure, and the next value which you are saying is of diastolic blood pressure. Now what do you mean by these two? There are two words, systole and diastole. Okay, systole means now systole means the blood pressure which is in your arteries. Now how do you measure the blood pressure of the how do you measure your blood pressure? That blood is flowing through your veins and arteries, right? Now this blood which is flowing through your arteries, it is imparting some pressure on the arterial walls, right? It is imparting some pressure on the arterial walls, and we measure this pressure, right? So what is your blood pressure? Please write down. Your blood pressure is the pressure of blood. Blood pressure is the pressure of blood which is imparted on the arterial walls, right? On the walls of the arteries and not veins, right? Because veins flow after capillaries and the blood pressure is reduced by them. So how do you measure the blood pressure? The blood pressure is the pressure imparted by blood on your arterial walls, right? Now this blood pressure, this can be of two types. First, it can be the pressure when your ventricles are in contraction. I told you that your ventricles contract, right? I told you that atria has got the function of receiving blood and ventricles have got the function of pumping blood, right? So when this ventricle, imagine that this ventricle is pumping blood into your pulmonary vein and this is pumping blood into your aorta. So imagine when this ventricle is pumping blood into your aorta, at that time this aorta will have got more pressure than the time when this ventricle is relaxing, है ना? कॉमन सेंस की बात है. एक पाइप है, एक मोटर है, उसमें प्रेशर कब ज़्यादा रहेगा उस पाइप में? when the motor is working, right? when the motor is pushing blood, when the motor is pumping blood to the blood vessels. But when it is relaxing and not pumping, at that time the blood pressure will get low because it is not pushing the blood into the arteries, right? So we measure the blood pressure at two times. First, it is during the systole. We say that there is a systole when the ventricles or atrium contracts, है ना? तो systole मतलब कुछ नहीं होता है, that just means contraction. right? That just means contraction. So whenever I say the word systole, you have to understand that I am talking when your ventricles are contracting or when your atrium is contracting. And when I use the word diastole, that means the atrium or ventricle is in relaxed position, that means they are relaxing. So this is the meaning of systole and diastole. So obviously जब systole होगा तब क्या होगा बच्चे, at that time the blood pressure in the arteries will be high. That is why your systolic blood pressure is always high and your diastolic blood pressure is always lower than your systolic blood pressure. ठीक है? So now let us look into how this cardiac cycle works. So first, cardiac cycle क्यों बोलते हैं? Because cycle is anything which goes in on periodicity. बार when it repeats itself, that is something what is called as cycle, right? So this cardiac cycle is total of 0.8 second. One cardiac cycle is of 0.8 second. Now how do you derive this? I told you about SA node. What is SA node? SA node is the pacemaker of your heart, right? Sinoatrial node has got the highest number of contractions per minute, and that is why it is called as the pacemaker of your heart, right? Now what is the normal heartbeat rate? That is 72 beats per minute. Everybody knows, right? We are studying this from since childhood. Now you know that in 1 minute you have got 60 seconds, right? And in 1 minute your heart is pumping around, how your heart is beating or contracting for around 72 times. So what will be the time duration of one contraction and relaxation? So you will divide 60 seconds by 72 times, that will come around to 0.8 seconds. So we say in one cycle when the heart contracts and relaxes, that time is what is cardiac cycle, right? And one cycle corresponds to 0.8 seconds. Okay, so this is the duration and your theory of cardiac cycle. Now let us start. Okay, so there are 3 phases of cardiac cycle. We'll look into 3 different phases. What are these? Okay, actually not 3, they are 5. Okay, first we will see about atrial contraction. And please write down the phases of phases of cardiac cycle. Give the heading phases of cardiac cycle and write down these phases. The first is atrial systole. Now tell me the meaning of atrial systole. Atrial systole means when the atrium will contract, right? When the atrium will contract. So there is atrial systole, then there will be ventricular systole, ventricular systole. Now this ventricular systole, this will correspond with atrial diastole, है ना? सो इसलिए मैंने इसको एक साथ लिखा है. इन दोनों का मतलब सेम नहीं होता है, बट दीज बोथ कॉरेस्पॉन्ड. व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंस? दैट व्हेन योर वेंट्रिकल्स विल बी इन सिस्टोल, योर एट्रियम विल बी रिलैक्स्ड, योर एट्रियम विल बी इन डायस्टोल. when I'll explain you about the cardiac cycle, you will get to know what I am saying. You will understand why is it so, right? So for now just write down that these two occur simultaneously and these are not the same thing. These just occur at the same time, right? तो यहाँ पे 3 नंबर लगा के साथ में लिख दो एट्रियल डायस्टोल. ठीक है, एट्रियल डायस्टोल हुआ. उसके बाद क्या होगा बच्चे? उसके बाद वेंट्रिकल का सिस्टोल आया था. नाउ देयर विल बी वेंट्रिकुलर डायस्टोल. वेंट्रिकुलर डायस्टोल, या वी ऑल्सो कॉल इट एज जॉइंट डायस्टोल. Joint diastole. Now why joint diastole? Understand that now when the ventricles are in diastole, now when the ventricles are relaxing, your atria are also relaxed, and because both atrium and ventricles are now relaxed, we say that this particular phase is your joint diastole. That means both atria and both ventricle, they are in a diastole. Now please infer one thing from this, that diastole of atrium and ventricle can occur simultaneously. Ventricles और atria आपका दोनों साथ में relax कर सकते हैं, but systole can never happen simultaneously, right? When the atria will contract, ventricle will relax, and when the ventricles will contract, atria will relax. But it is possible that both of them may be together in a relaxed condition, right? And the relaxed condition is called as, relaxation of heart muscles is called as diastole, and the contraction is called as systole. I hope you don't have any problem up till here. Now whenever we start the cardiac cycle, it's easier to make you understand if we start from joint diastole, right? First we will understand that all the chambers of heart are relaxed, all the chambers, all the four, you know, now that we have got four chambers. What are those? These are right atrium and ventricle, left atrium and ventricle, and you know that right sided is your deoxygenated blood, and है ना, मैंने आपको आर.डी. शर्मा का निमोनिक बताया था that R and D, right will always have deoxygenated blood and left side will have oxygenated blood. ठीक है, so let us understand, let us now assume that we are starting from the phase of joint diastole and all the chambers of heart are in a relaxed position, right? Right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle, right? This side is right and this is left, है ना? आप अपने book में लिख लीजिए तो you will have it easier to understand. Now understand, now there is never the stasis of flow of blood, right? In your body, when you are living, your blood is always in a flowing state and it never stops to flow. It never stops to flow through your blood vessels. Even if your heart is relaxing or your heart is contracting, blood is always flowing in your blood vessels, right? It never stops. ठीक है, चलो, with this we start our cardiac cycle. Now see, this is your right atrium. Now before this, one more thing, that whenever atria will contract, both the atria will contract, and whenever ventricles will contract, both the ventricles will contract, and when they relax, both of them relax. When the ventricles relax, both of these relax. Okay, the relaxation and contraction of left and right side are always same, है ना? Atria and ventricle, they contract alternatively. When atria contracts, ventricle relaxes, and when ventricles contract, atria relaxes, but left and right, they always contract and relax together. Their function is always same. So whenever I say that this atria is contracting, you have to understand that this atrium is also contracting, and whenever I say that this ventricle is relaxing, so that means that left ventricle is also relaxing. I hope you are clear with all this, है ना? जो भी चीज़ अगर नहीं समझ में है, please rewind the video and please understand what I am saying. Please ingrain it in your brain and then move forward. चलो, so what is happening is that this atrium, ये जो आपका atrium है, this is in a relaxed state. This is in a relaxed state. But even if it is in a relaxed state, what is happening? Blood is coming through your superior and inferior vena cava. I told you that blood flow never stops. Blood flow never stops in your heart. So when blood is coming, first this atrium is receiving blood, from superior and inferior vena cava. Now because of this atrium is receiving blood, and this blood which is received by this atrium, this is flowing to your right ventricle, because both right and left ventricle, because both right atrium and right ventricles are in a relaxed position. ठीक है, जब दोनों relaxed होंगे तो क्या होगा? The blood will come from superior and inferior vena cava. It will be received by the atrium. It will be received by the atrium, and blood from this atrium will go on to this right ventricle. कोई दिक्कत नहीं है यहाँ तक. Just like this, same will happen in the right side, same will happen in the left side. ठीक है, when this is relaxing, this will also be relaxing, and blood from pulmonary veins will be coming into your left atrium and it will be going into your left ventricle. ठीक है, so let us discuss only from one side. तब हम यहाँ पे साइकिल से मुड़ करके वापस यहाँ तक आएंगे, but you have to understand कि जो भी यहाँ पे हो रहा है वो साथ साथ यहाँ पे भी हो रहा है. ठीक है, नाउ व्हाट हैपन्स इज, कुछ परसेंट ऑफ ब्लड तो आपका डायरेक्टली ऐसे फ्लो कर जाएगा, बट आप सोचिए ना, कुछ ब्लड यहाँ पे रह भी जाएगा, कुछ ब्लड यहाँ पे रह भी जाएगा जो कि यहाँ पे नॉर्मली फ्लो नहीं कर पाएगा. सो नाउ टू मेक दिस ब्लड विच इज स्टेइंग इन वेंट्रिकल to go in, which is staying in atrium to go into ventricle, this atrium will contract. Now this atrium will contract and this is what is called as atrial systole. ठीक है, तो सबसे पहले क्या हुआ, मेरा हार्ट joint diastole में था, and because of the joint diastole, blood was received into the right atrium from your superior and inferior vena cava, and it was being drained into the ventricles. I hope यहाँ तक किसी को कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. Now what happened is all the blood is not able to pass through this ventricle. So what happened? This atrium contract. And why will this atrium contract? Because of the signal sent by SA node. Sinoatrial node is responsible for the contraction. ठीक है. Now this sinoatrial node, this sent a signal to this atrium and as well as this atrium to contract. ठीक है. ना बिकॉज ऑफ दिस कॉन्ट्रैक्शन आप सोचिए क्या होगा, ऊपर में एक चेंबर है, नीचे एक चेंबर, दिस चेंबर कॉन्ट्रैक्टेड, ऑल द ब्लड विच वॉज इन दिस चेंबर, दिस विल मूव ऑन टू द ventricle, this will move on to the ventricle. So now the atria will get emptied and all the blood from atria will come into the ventricle. All the blood from atria will come into the ventricle. ठीक है. This is what is called as atrial systole. ठीक है. This is what is called as atrial systole. Now your NCERT mentions one value that because of the atrial systole, because of the contraction of atrium, the blood flow to the ventricle is increased by 30%. मतलब जब normally दोनों relaxed position में था तो जितना भी blood यहाँ से यहाँ flow करके आ रहा था, now when this atrium contracts, the blood flow is increased to ventricle by how much? It is increased by 30%. Okay. So this phase is called as atrial systole and this atrial systole lasts for 0.1 second. This atrial systole lasts for 0.1 second. ठीक है. चलिए. So look at this, है ना. This is the picture of cardiac cycle. इसको हम लोग अच्छे से समझेंगे. बच्चों को बहुत कन्फ्यूजन होती है बट दिस इज़ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग एंड ईजी टॉपिक इफ़ यू अंडरस्टैंड इट वंस, राइट. हमने क्या किया, इस कार्डियक साइकिल को 0.8 सेकेंड्स में बांट दिया. 0.1 2 3 4 5 6 7 एंड 0.8. नाउ वी आर स्टार्टिंग विथ जॉइंट डायस्टोल. मान लेते यहाँ पे क्या था, हमारा जो हार्ट था दैट वॉज इन जॉइंट डायस्टोल एंड एज सुन एज द जॉइंट डायस्टोल एंडेड देयर वॉज AS फॉर एट्रियल सिस्टोल एंड दिस एट्रियल सिस्टोल इट lasted for how much? It lasted for 0.1 second. See, red is for the systole, right? So this is for atrium and the outer circle is for ventricle. So this atrial, it remained in systole for how much duration? It remained in systole for 0.1 second. ठीक है. Now what will happen? I will at the end of this cardiac cycle, I will show you one animation and which will make things even more clear. ठीक है. Now what will happen? This has contracted. Now because this has contracted, the ventricles will have to relax. Why is it so? Because दोनों contract कर जाएगा तो blood कहाँ जाएगा? ठीक है. Blood has got, blood has to have some place to stay. So when this atrium will contract, ventricles will relax. ठीक है. अब now what this ventricle has to do? This ventricle is collecting the blood फ्रॉम द एट्रियम. नाउ जैसे आपका एट्रिया से वेंट्रिकल में बिकॉज ऑफ ग्रेविटी या आप जो भी मान लीजिए वो वेंट्रिकल्स में कलेक्ट हो रहा था, तो वेंट्रिकल्स में कलेक्ट ही होता जाएगा. वेंट्रिकल से अपने आप एओटा में या पल्मोनरी आर्टरी में नहीं चढ़ेगा. वाई? एक तो बिकॉज उन आर्टरीज में प्रेशर रहता है, दूसरा और क्या रहता है, बिकॉज इट इज एंटी ग्रेविटी है ना. खुद से ऐसे कैसे चढ़ेगा, तुम सोचो ना, इट इज नॉट पॉसिबल. सो फॉर पुशिंग द ब्लड इन टू दीज आर्टरीज द वेंट्रिकल्स विल हैव टू कॉन्ट्रैक्ट. द वेंट्रिकल्स विल हैव टू कॉन्ट्रैक्ट. So now these ventricles will contract. But जब ventricles आपका contract करेगा, this atrium will relax. Because अब atrium का काम हो गया है, so now this atrium will relax and the blood will start, the blood from these vena cava will again start to, get collected in this atrium. ठीक है. So now what second step में क्या होगा? Now this ventricle will contract and because of the contraction of these ventricles, what will happen? Some blood will try to go again back to atria because of the high pressure, है ना. सोचिए यहाँ से भी blood आ रहा था, अब अचानक से ये contract किया तो क्या होगा? ब्लड चाहेगा कि हम वापस उधर ही चले जाए. ठीक है. सो टू प्रिवेंट दिस देयर इज दिस वाल्व. There is this valve. What is this valve called as? I told you that this is your tricuspid valve, right? This is your tricuspid valve. ठीक है. So ये आपका जो right ventricle है और या फिर जो left ventricle है, now this ventricle will contract and it will try to send blood to the arteries. What are the arteries? It will try to send blood to the pulmonary artery and left ventricle will try to send blood to the aorta. ठीक है, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं. एंड बिकॉज ऑफ सेंडिंग of these artery, and because of sending of blood to these artery, there are these valves, right? These valves will close. ठीक है, ये to prevent the backflow of blood, what will happen when this ventricle contracts? These valves, what are these valves? These are the tricuspid valves, and on this side there are the bicuspid valves. These will close to prevent the backflow of blood. Now there are two more valves which are, you know, guarding the opening of this aorta and pulmonary artery. There are two more valves which are guarding the opening of this aorta and pulmonary artery. These valves are also closed, but when this ventricle is trying to pump the blood into these arteries, these valves will open so that blood from ventricles can flow into these arteries. ठीक है, तो अभी तक क्या हुआ? Now this atrium was receiving blood, both of them were relaxing. ठीक है, atrium contracted so that the rest of the blood can come to ventricle. Now when all the blood has came to ventricle, now this atrium will relax and ventricles will contract. Now when these ventricles will contract, it will try to push the blood again to the arteries, है ना, and when it will try to push the blood to the arteries, there will be opening of this aortic valve and the pulmonary valve. These valves are guarding your aorta and your pulmonary artery, and to prevent the backflow of blood, what will happen? These valves, these are the atrioventricular valves, and the tricuspid valves and bicuspid valves, these will close so that no blood comes from ventricle into the atrium. I hope यहाँ तक किसी को कोई problem नहीं है. Now this is what is called as your ventricular systole. This is what is called as your ventricular systole, and this ventricular systole lasts for 0.3 seconds, right? This ventricular systole lasts for 0.3 seconds. Now after it has pushed all the bloods to the arteries, what will happen is now the ventricles will relax. ठीक है, 0.3 सेकेंड के बाद जैसे ही सारा का सारा ब्लड आपका इन आर्टरीज में चला जाएगा, now the ventricles will relax. Now because relaxing, what will happen? The pressure of these ventricles, it will start to go down. The pressure of these ventricle, it will start to go down, and because the pressure in these ventricles, it will start to go down, what will happen? Blood will try to come back from these arteries into the ventricles. ठीक है, now to prevent these aortic and pulmonary valves close again so that there is no backflow of blood from these arteries and these veins into the ventricle. ठीक है, फिर से क्या हुआ? Because now the ventricles are relaxing, these valves है ना, these open, these close so that there is no backflow of blood from this artery and this vein to the ventricle. ठीक है, and because also of decreasing pressure, what happens is now this valve which was closed, atrioventricular valve which was closed during the ventricular systole, it will now open, and when it will open again the blood will start flowing from here to here, and now the ventricles are relaxing. The atria was already in the relaxed phase, and because of this now we will say that atria and ventricle, these are in a relaxed state, right? These are in a relaxed state. So I hope आपको समझ में आया होगा. जो भी चीज़ जहाँ से नहीं समझ आया, please rewind the video and watch it again. ठीक है, there is one more thing which I would like to tell you, that why is it so that the ventricles are contracting 0.1 second after the atria contracts? It is because SA node is located on the atrium, right? And when SA node sends the signal, first the atrium contracts, then it takes 0.1 second for that signal to reach from SA node to the AV node, and from AV node the signal is distributed by bundle of Hills and the Purkinje fibers to both the ventricles, and there is a time lag of 0.1 second of the signal to reach from the atrium to ventricle. That is why the ventricles contract 0.1 second after the atrium contracts. This was about the cardiac cycle. Okay, next video I will clear you, I will revise it once more along with the animation which I want to show you, and we will discuss about the various terms, joint systole and joint diastole and ventricular systole and atrial systole. Okay, thank you.